Welcome to Immigration Uncovered, the DocketWise video podcast. I'm your host, James Pittman. This is episode 42, and today we are talking about the AI revolution and its effect on the translation industry. And I have with me a perfect guest for this topic, Ian Hawes, who is the managing partner of ImmiTranslate. Ian, welcome to the program.
Thank you, James. It's really exciting to be on here with you.
Absolutely. And I should mention right off the bat that ImmiTranslate is a DocketWise integration partner. So I've known Ian for quite a while, and I know his extreme acumen on the topic of translations, and he's been in this industry for a while. So this is wonderful. And Ian, why don't, before we even get into the sort of the AI, how did you get into the translation aspect of it?
Sure. So it's actually a really interesting story. So like way back in like 2013, 2014, my best friend came to me and was like, hey, he had met his he was deployed to the Air Force. He was overseas. He met his future wife. They dated for a little bit, and he fell in love. And he was like, this is great. Like, let's get married. You can come back to the U.S. He was being deployed back stateside. So he and his fiance went through the K-1 fiance visa process, and then went through the process to get her green card. And at the end of it, he came to me in like 2014 and was like, "Hey, look, we did this process, and it wasn't hard. We did it ourselves. We didn't use an attorney. But what was kind of really annoying were we're getting the documents that we need actually translated and certified so that they would be accepted." And so he came to me. He was like, "We should make a business doing this, like just focused on these translations." And I was like, "That's a terrible idea. Like, it's not going to make any money. It's not going to be successful. I don't know anything about translations. I don't speak any other languages. My background was all in software development." And so he finally kind of bugged me for, a few months. And then I was like, "All right, fine. We'll do it." And, of all the like ideas that we kind of came up with, we're both born entrepreneurs, and this was the one that actually really stuck. Not only was it successful in that, hey, we had a viable business, but it was something that we felt good about. It was something that, filled really a need that, of course, obviously things in 2014 were same, but kind of different. And it was through that I kind of came into this industry and really embraced, I say one thing that I think most entrepreneurs kind of shudder out, which is that this is kind of my career now. This is something that I'm committed to and I really enjoy. And so, it's kind of a big leap for me as I've, grown up in this industry and seen different things and stuff. But yeah, so that's like the origin story of ImmiTranslate.
Yeah, that's incredible. I love hearing the backstories, and it's such a great time that you're in translation industry, because now we have the AI revolution, which is a lot of what we're going to be talking about, and that really, just as with many fields, that really sort of, I don't want to say threatens, but that looks like it's really going to revolutionize and is revolutionizing the field. So it's fortuitous because that was not there in 2014, and now you're in the industry and you're getting a front row seat for seeing how this amazing technology is going to change so many aspects of it. What was your sort of initial, when you first sort of became? I mean, you were in software development, so you knew about natural language processing and things like that. But when AI really bust onto the consumer scene, like about 2 years ago, like what was your first reaction as far as what it meant for the translation industry?
Sure. So being in the translation and in the wider language industry, obviously we have felt the effects of not just AI, but also improvements to what used to be, much more of a human-based process to, hey, now the machines have taken over, So being in this industry, we're kind of used to like, the death is impending of your industry. What are you going to do next? And that's actually really liberating for us, because we're not so focused on what does this mean for us? It's kind of like, okay, we got through we got through machine translation. Okay, now there's this new neural machine translation. We got through both of those. So for us, in a lot of other industry folks in the language industry, it's just kind of business as usual. As far as like when I first saw the power of AI and large language models. So it was a little bit earlier than like the Chat GPT. So, we had seen there are AI models that were prior to like, the open AI models that kind of did things really well, but they weren't kind of actually that intelligent. And that was sort of a running theme among software engineers, is that like, oh yeah, this AI is like not very smart at most things, but kind of maybe a little bit smarter at some things. And so I remember in I believe it was like August or September of 2022. So before ChatGPT had been released, OpenAI had sent out a bunch of developer emails basically saying, hey, come use our new API, right? And so back then it was called DaVinci. GPT-3 was marketed as GPT-3. It was called DaVinci. And I remember the first time I kind of played around with it, I didn't really know what I was doing. And so, I got this invite and I, sort of kind of figured out what was going on. But then the idea of like a prompt and like these responses was very foreign. And I remember there was this tweet from someone that I follow on Twitter that was basically using an prompt to extract information. And I thought, that's actually really interesting, because we have, like, going back, 2022, which in AI years feels like a decade ago. There were a lot of things that we were not very good at. And one of them was doing simple analysis on a document. So take like a birth certificate, for example. We didn't know that it was a birth certificate. You look at it, you go, okay, this is a birth certificate, but like, how do you actually process the text on that document to say, okay, with a certainty, this is a birth certificate? And then how do you go beyond that and say, like, okay, this is a birth certificate issued in this year, by this organization or this whatever. And so what I did was I took a crisp document that we have in our test library, and I ran it through like a free OCR, and I plugged it into DaVinci, and I told it, okay, tell me what kind of document this is, and tell me when it was issued. And it spit back the exact document name and the exact date that it was issued. And I was like, okay, let's go a step further. Tell me everything you can tell me about this document. Tell me who's the subject of this birth certificate. Who are the parents? What's the gender? What date was it issued? What municipality? What region? And it spit everything back out at me. And I was like, okay, all right. This is like, let's try 5 other documents. And we got 5 other results, and they were all accurate. And so that was like the first time that I was like, okay, I hope nobody else figures this out, because this is a really big competitive advantage for us. Back then, all we were trying to do was be better at standardizing our templated translations. So, for example, our biggest, document that we see are birth and marriage certificates. That's huge in the immigration industry. Just about every applicant has some form of that. And so for us, just being able to classify and extract that information from these documents would allow us to reduce the turnaround time on translations tremendously, because we could be templating them, and we were in a way, but we didn't have a good way of training didn't have a good way of analyzing the documents to figure out, okay, what are we actually looking at? And so that was back in 2022. And things have, like I said, AI, 1 year in AI era is like 5 years, right? So things have improved dramatically since that little experiment, and we've been able to sort of roll stuff out into production. But yeah, that was the first time I was like, we got something going on here.
Amazing. As of right now, so how do you see AI sort of making changes in the translation industry at present? And what are some of the most significant advancements that you see going on?
Sure. So AI and large language models are really built for translation. Like the original paper that this transformer architecture, which is kind of revolutionized, had been the bedrock of modern AI and large language models, was actually a academic paper written by a few people at Google, and their goal was to create a better neural machine translation application in Google Translate. And so really from the very get-go, LLMs have been very good at translation, because that's what they were effectively designed to do. They have been phenomenally better since the initial sort of transformer paper, and looking at like GPT-2 and GPT-3 and now GPT-4, we see huge improvements, not only in translation of sort of, the more popular languages, but even in these smaller esoteric languages that don't get as much attention. It's really been, it's been a massive improvement. And, there are concerns that are present, and certainly in use cases with LLMs that are not specific to translation. For example, hallucinations. We've talked a lot about that. Those are actually not as present in translations because the text is, you have to change some parameters when you're using LLMs to do translation, but we don't suffer from some of the same side effects. So the hallucinations are not always present. They come across occasionally, but LLMs are incredibly good at doing translation, and they have really always been. If you look at like the evolution of machine translation. So I consider LLMs to be like a distinctly higher level above machine translation because of this thing called a context window. So if you look at machine translation, Google Translate DeepL or neural machine translation, they have to break down the text that you input into fragments, and so they segment them out into smaller pieces, and then they run them through the algorithm. And what happens is when you do that, you're not made aware of the text that sits above, or the text that sits below. So as a result, LLMs have a distinct advantage because of this context window where they can have all of this information in the mind of the AI before they even do any sort of translation. So that immediately sets things like tone and audience and other attributes that a human translator are very good at identifying that a machine translation is not. They set those parameters very well up front, and as a result, you have a translation that's much more nuanced to the reader or the audience.
Okay. And so does ImmiTranslate actually incorporate any AI features at present?
So actually, it's great that we're having this conversation. This is a really exciting time. So ImmiTranslate, we're publicly launching something called Catalyst. And Catalyst is the first AI-powered tool specifically trained and built for certified translations. So if you're familiar with translating, a document with like Google Translate or something, right? The output that you receive is just a string of text. So with Catalyst, we've actually built an algorithm and an AI model that is designed to produce a translation that mirrors what a human would produce for a certified translation. So Catalyst is there's nothing like it. There's no other application of LLMs producing a translation that looks like what Catalyst produces. And what it produces is akin to what our professional human translators produce. And so it's a really exciting time for us. This is something that, like I said, we've been building this for, I don't know, over a year and a half now. And it's truly incredible. So it's something that we've tested for the last 3 months in a very confined way, where we have guardrails with the existing human translators within our network, and we've been surprised at every turn because it is surpassing even what we expected would be possible. There's a whole bunch of other sort of stuff that goes into a certified translation that we'll probably talk about later, but for the most part, Catalyst produces professional quality certified translations that really compete with human quality effectively instantly.
Now, for example, with the immigration area, you've got the requirement by USCIS that you have to have a certificate of translation. So they're expecting a human translation. So I don't see a way that you'll be able to use this product specifically for immigration, though, at present.
So actually, it's a great question. With our process, what we've built in is that every translation that is produced by Catalyst, if you elect to have us certify the translation, our human translators go in, review it, make any edits that they see as being, reflective of a certified translation, and then they are the ones signing off on the translation. There's an application that we've looked at where if you have, let's say you have maybe a paralegal doing translations, you don't really want anyone else involved in it, you can use Catalyst simply as a translation tool, and then you can sign off on the translation the same way you would sign off on your own translation. We're leveraging the data that we've basically refined over the last, I don't know how many years, and we're building in our expertise in certified translations with what we know about what makes a good certified translation, what we know about transliteration, all these things that we've learned. We've put this together in Catalyst, and we are not only using it internally to produce drafts for our own translation team, but we want to expose that to nonprofits that maybe don't have the language resources that they need to manage their caseload. We want to send it out to law firms that aren't comfortable sending full documents to a translation company like us. We want to enhance their own language capabilities with Catalyst.
Well, I'm so glad we have a front row seat to hear about this, and it's such a great development. This is something that you've developed totally in-house then?
That's correct. So Catalyst works as basically a series of algorithms on top of like a bedrock LLM. So, for example, Anthropic's Claude or OpenAI GPT-4o, or even using Meta's Llama. It's a series of enhancements and sequences and other tools that go into preparing a document to be inserted into what we call the bedrock LLM. And then the output is then taken back into Catalyst and produces either a PDF for a certified translation, or if you want a Word document to be able to make edits to it. This is something that Catalyst is built to support both of those use cases. And yes, this is something that we've developed over the course of a year and a half. It's not, I'd love to say that it's entirely in-house, but, we do use tools and other non-LLM AI models to enhance the input and the output of what the LLM produces. But yeah, it's effectively something that, to my knowledge, there's no other translation company doing anything like it.
And when are you debuting this on ImmiTranslate?
So this is going to launch September 24th.
Amazing. And is it something that's going to be available to all subscribers, or will there be a separate tier, or how will it work?
So actually, at the moment, everyone that orders a translation through ImmiTranslate is able to take advantage of Catalyst. So what that means is that you see basically instantly a draft of what we are looking at of the translation. That doesn't mean that it's certified, and there's still an opportunity to request revisions the same way that we have with our existing certified translation service. But what this does is it gives you output immediately, so you can see not only the document that we are translating, but what it's going to look like, and you can see the changes that our human translators make as well. Later on, we want to open up the sort of self-service concept of Catalyst, where we want to operate on a credit system where you buy a certain number of credits, you can upload as many documents as you want, and then it produces the certified translation for you to download and then sign off on yourself. We see this being incredibly powerful for nonprofits that simply don't have language resources full time. Maybe they don't have the budget for it. This works great as a draft. If you for more complex documents, there is still we're at the point now where I still don't want any translations being sent out that obviously we can't, because of the legality behind a certified translation. We need somebody to sign off on it, but I still see us being a little bit of ways away from an environment where no one really needs to review it. It's good enough to just sign off on, but it is significantly better than what's out there now. So for example, now, prior to Catalyst, our translators were taking, scanned documents that are messy. You've probably, we share mutual clients, so you see the same sort of documents that we see, where it's a blurry scan, or the document is partially destroyed. It's been through who knows what, and you're not getting a high quality 72 DPI scan or anything like that. You're getting kind of a messy picture. So in the days before Catalyst, our translators were first transcribing it. So they're on one side of the screen they have the source document, on the other side they have a blank page to see, okay, what does this look like? Recreating fragments of the document like tables, or recreating positioning where images or emblems or signatures would be, and then doing the meat of the translation, which is the actual words within the document. In our line of work, that transcription part takes the most time, and it also introduces the most errors. So one of the kind of misconceptions that we see is that, okay, you're a human translator, you got to be perfect, right? You don't make any errors. And that's simply not the case. And that's not unique to our company. That's any company that's doing translation of the documents that we see is inherently looking at a standard error rate. And so typos happen, that sort of thing. With Catalyst and with human translators, when you combine them, the errors go to zero effectively. you have, AI effectively doesn't make typos. It's very knowledgeable and confident in what it produces, which may or may not be correct, but it's not making, the sort of typos and omissions that like a human translator might. When you add in the component of a professional human translator looking over this draft that Catalyst has produced, then you have a combination of two people, more or less, and it's a much more thorough and accurate translation than if you just had one person. And so this concept of like a draft translation is how we look at it. So Catalyst produces certified translations that are still drafts. There's no signature attached to it. You can't submit it to USCIS without having somebody sign off on it, but it will save you a significant amount of time in producing this initial translation.
Understood. Now, it's axiomatic that all industries use technology because they want to be more efficient and reduce costs and be more accurate and so forth. So when you're talking about, having a human translator do a purely human translation versus using a tool like Catalyst, where the draft is produced by the AI, the human checks it, and if necessary, signs off on it. What are we talking about in terms of improvements in speed, improvements in accuracy? And is there a reduction in cost because the human being's not spending as much time translating every word?
Sure. So actually, it's incredibly fast. I mean, the graph on time to translation is like it's not even close. So the Catalyst from start to finish takes about 2 minutes to produce a translation. I'm not aware of any of our translators that are that quick. On the human side, once they have access to the translation, the process of reviewing it and signing off on it, it takes anywhere from about 30 to 40 minutes, depending on the complexity of the document, how many pages there are. But it's a significant reduction in what we call our standard turnaround time. So for most documents, less than 6 pages, we have about a 24 to 48 hour turnaround time. Catalyst produces those translations in about 3 minutes, and then give or take about an hour or two for a human translator to review it. You're talking about a significant time savings. And it's also that's more evident when you're looking at situations where you need something back right away, right? So that's where Catalyst really shines, is in the turnaround time. As far as the accuracy goes, we are continuing to improve the output that Catalyst produces. What goes into Catalyst is a series of things that we've kind of pioneered. So a transformer OCR architecture, we use what we call OCR grafting to basically combine the document format with the OCR that's produced alongside, a prompt that limits how we want the translation to appear. And so that's really cool too, because that's not something that really we see any other company doing. And so the accuracy is only getting better. It is just in the initial, when we first started Catalyst early this summer, the accuracy was around like a 78%. As the summer has gone on, as AI in AI time, that's summer start to end is like a whole year. The Bedrock LLMs have actually improved the accuracy without any change from us. So we see the accuracy approaching 90% now. Where things are only going to improve in the accuracy is the introduction of pioneer models that are more fine-tuned for the sorts of input-output that we want. OpenAI is constantly producing, new ways for us to input the information that we generate into their LLM to get an output that is satisfactory. So we see that improving the accuracy. OpenAI has a model that is geared towards the slower, more accurate production of content versus, the kind of instant content production that we see with like ChatGPT. And we think that model, when we gain access to that model with Catalyst, that will allow us to produce, an accuracy that we are even more comfortable with. So yeah, in terms of accuracy, it's only going to get better. Where cost kind of comes into play is that it's been a challenge for us. The price that we start with has been the price that we've had since we started this business. And we've kind of moved heaven and earth to maintain that price, right? We are the Costco hot dog, so to speak, where we have not, the hot dog is still like $1.25, $1.50, whatever. And so the certified translation we produce are still $25 a page. Catalyst allows us to maintain that price point for the foreseeable future. We would not we would not be able to continue operating as a business without these technological improvements, without it. And in terms of price, we're much more competitive on price than, some of the other companies out there that focus on certified translations. And we think, you're not going to have all three in this matrix of accuracy, quality, turnaround, and price. Like it's not, it doesn't exist, but we try to skew closer to the, price turnaround time of the matrix than the price accuracy time or the price turnaround time. What that means is that we've given the tools for our clients to always, there's an opportunity to review the translation and request revisions. There's an opportunity to, have somebody else take a look at it when you think that we may have made mistakes, which it does happen. And those are tools that have been around for years with us. And so that part isn't changing. There are going to be a segment of people that are not comfortable with any of their documents being close to or even within the realm of AI technology, and we understand that. And so as a result, those folks may pay, a higher price, but we're not talking significantly more. It's a modest increase in what we're doing. But the goal is that we maintain this affordable price and we continue to serve our clients on price versus, having to raise rates and kind of fight that battle.
Understood. Well, let's talk a little bit about the limitations, as it were, of the current state of AI with translations. And so you mentioned involvement of the human translator to review the draft, to do any revisions. Do they have to, we talked about the need for context. So do they then have to put in, cultural context and rework language to be culturally appropriate? And what might some of the other, the current limitations be? I'm not saying some of these things won't be overcome, surely they will, but the current limitations and how do you see some of these things evolving down the line?
Sure. So yeah, there are limitations, just like any new technology. And we've done our best to curtail those limitations, and cycle them to the top so that you can understand what may or may not be occurring. In terms of the specifics of a translation, yeah, there are always going to be issues where culturally what was said is not accurate, right? And that's not specific to our AI translations, but that's kind of AI translations as a whole. I would say that the LLMs are significantly less susceptible to those sorts of mistakes versus the traditional machine translation algorithms. So, for example, DeepL is a NMT, neural machine translation, and so they are susceptible to issues like that, whereas LLMs typically don't have those sorts of idiosyncrasies. Now, I will say that it's also dependent not only on the LLM but also on the language pair. So when we run tests all the time between GPT-4 and Claude 3.5, and then Llama's or Meta's Llama, and there are languages that the different LLMs are much better and much more accurate at translating into. And so the beauty of Catalyst is that we can mix and match those models when we find that a certain LLM is better at one language pair than the other. And, there's a handful of languages that we, are aware of don't do well with AI translation. And in fact, full disclosure, Catalyst we're going to launch with only a series of we support 70 plus languages. Catalyst is only launching with about 7 languages. So there are still, a ways to go and more testing that needs to be done. But, those issues do arise. And that's why it's important that we still have these human in the loop, concept where a human can look at something that, would be sensitive or a similar sort of confusing term, and make edits to it. And the other thing too is that at ImmiTranslate, we have focused so much on these certified translations that it's not common that we come across documents that we don't that have these sort of complex, cultural nuances. And for the most part, the majority of our documents are being translated into English. And for that reason, it has not been as much of a concern with Catalyst to overcome those as something where we were doing localization into multiple different languages. But it is still on our radar, and having the human in the loop is really the best guardrail that we can create right now.
Okay. Now, well, just out of curiosity, what are some of the languages that you find have more difficulty when using AI translation?
So typically Arabic, the Middle Eastern languages have probably the more or the less accuracy, I would say. Spanish obviously is going Spanish, French, Portuguese, those languages are going to be closer to, the higher quality level. Less spoken languages, some of the languages of India that are simply don't have as much training material in LLMs. Those suffer from, the greatest or the greatest risk of inaccuracy. And what's really cool is that because LLMs are trained differently than machine translation, LLMs are actually, like I said, less susceptible to cultural idiosyncrasies because the majority of the LLM training data is all internet data, right? So we speak on the internet differently than we would, where in a situation where machine translation is being trained on, more academic documents or, more documents that are considered legalese, where you would have less, slang or other kind of cultural nuances. LLMs are again much better positioned to kind of tackle those sorts of issues. In terms of like the beyond that, like what languages are have the most issue, you're getting into like, okay, what languages are less common on the internet. And that's been sort of a quick filter for, what's better versus, what's worse. There, the African languages that have less content on the internet suffer. I'd love to put together sort of a graph of like the different languages and kind of highlight what we found, because it is a really interesting kind of question about, what does AI know and what does it not know? And we're constantly wondering that. And when it comes to language, it can pretend to know the language to a point where it's making up things, which is kind of, another risk that comes up.
Right, right. Now, interesting, and it's kind of the answer that I expected. I also figured that languages that have a great deal of regional variation or dialectical variation, such as Arabic, would present certain problems because you have a lot of regional usages, which can, really is quite different. I mean, Arabic in Morocco is really totally different language almost than, that which is spoken in the Levant and so forth. So that's kind of what I figured. But I'd love to see that graph if you ever put it together. That would be an interesting.
Yeah, yes, it would. It would.
Okay, now let's talk about some of the ethical considerations, because those are things people think about. So when you're using AI for translation and you're handling, sensitive or personal documents, let's say you're going to do certified translation for immigration, what are the ethical considerations, the data security considerations, and how are you tackling those?
Sure. So there's a huge ethical dilemma, or not dilemma, but consideration when it comes to LLMs and any sort of customer documentation. And so that's something that we obviously take seriously. We don't train on, none of the documents that we receive are trained on any sort of memory model. So what that means is that you're sending a document to us. It's not going into some repository where it's being trained, and it's not. We have a zero data retention policy when it comes to the AI LLMs that we use. So what that means is that they're not training it on the documents either, and that's something that is really important because we're not. These are documents that are confidential and proprietary, and not only do we not have a right to sort of make that assignment of how it's going to be trained, but we don't want anyone else down the line to be able to do that either. So that's really important. So before we can use a tool in this sort of chain of Catalyst workflows, we have to make sure that it's not going to be used by somebody else to train on it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we do see value in having a repository of documents to eventually train on. And that's why we've moved towards an opt-in only model. So you have to specifically opt into having your document entered into, it's a simple question, hey, would you like to help us train our AI model, and it has a link to our privacy policy and our AI privacy policy as well. And that's something that, it's a focus for us to eventually have this data where we feel that it's ethical for us to train on this data because people have specifically opted into it. One of the more common things that I hear when I talk to, not less ethical, but people that are in the AI industry is that, oh, you've been around for so long, you must have all this data. Well, yeah, like we have all this data, but years ago we created a data retention policy where we basically said we're going to delete all this data because it's a huge liability. And so that's kind of something that we've maintained. And so as a result, we don't really have all this data. The other thing is that, we have a repository of translations that we've produced that are not, that don't have any personal information on it. So these are think of the birth certificates, marriage certificates, vital documents where we've scrubbed all the PII. There's not even a catalog number. It's the format basically of a document, and that's something that we use in some of our templated translations. But we are looking at how we can improve that to basically use AI to instantly scrub PII from documents, which again is a important step in being ethical with the data that we collect. So yeah, I mean, in terms of data security beyond just the use of data for training, but in terms of data security, that hasn't changed. That's something that we've taken seriously since day one. The documents that we produce are all encrypted at rest. Everything is transmitted securely. We have a very rigorous security process for not only the translators but the administrators that work with the documents that we come across and that we translate, and so that really hasn't changed at all. That's always been very rigorous, and it's been thorough and since day one, effectively.
Okay. Great answer. And I'm sure all that security documentation is on your website available.
Yeah. So we have a whole security page. And actually we take for our data training, we actually take that very seriously because we look at the types of customers that are sending us documents. So for example, if you're using the DocketWise integration, the DocketWise ImmiTranslate integration, we don't even ask you if you want to opt into this data, because we take the stance that if you are submitting the data on behalf of somebody else, you don't have a right to even opt into this process, right? We only look at documents where the system thinks are end users of the document. So if the document is about you, then we know, okay, presumably you have the right to opt into this process to let us use your document for training. But in a context where we know that you're like an attorney or a non-individual, business, something like that, then we take the assumption that you don't have the authorization. We're not even going to bother showing it to you. You're not going to be able to opt in.
Understood. Well, I want to talk about the elephant in the room, which is, about AI. It's the elephant in the room every time we talk about AI. Do you foresee a time when AI could eventually completely replace human translators, or do you think there's really always going to be a need for a hybrid?
Well, no, I don't. There will always be the need for a human in the loop, for a hybrid option, because ultimately it comes down to, like most things, costs, right? So the human translator is always going to cost more. That divide is only expanding, and I don't in the immediate future, I still see translators existing kind of how they have before. I think that translators are very good at complaining, but I also think that they're very good at adopting new technology. So I do see an opportunity for translators to be the entry point to using LLMs for translation. And I also think that companies that have a much larger budget for localization, they will continue to do what they have done, and they will look to expand their use of LLMs. But I think that they will find that the quality of a human in the loop is always going to be superior to just an AI translation. And I think for the next 10 years, they're still going to want that kind of security blanket of a human in the loop. Beyond that, who knows? 10 years ago, like we had, Google Translate was like kind of the more cutting edge translation tool, and now it's not. And so things can change. where I see the biggest job loss being is in the sort of junior translators, people that are doing this part-time, maybe they just came out of college. I certainly don't recommend anyone take a study in like translation studies. It may be a little bit tougher, but there are roles in, there's a very large community of people that are studying translations in LLMs and fine-tuning and helping to fine-tune LLMs that are specific to language translation. So we've talked about the sort of the larger LLM, right? The large, the XL LLMs, which are like GPT-4 and Claude. There's actually a fairly large amount of LLMs that are fine-tuned just for specific language pairs. And so I think that there's, an opportunity if you want to specialize in translation studies, for example, there's an opportunity for you to kind of augment some of these LLMs that are being created. And I also think there's an opportunity to be, basically a localization engineer where you have a specialty in computer science or, some other engineering degree, and you can kind of cross that with being bilingual and focusing on another language as your sort of translation language. I do see that. And there's this whole subset of companies like us where, we create technology and we sell it to companies that don't have their own in-house localization teams. Hey, look, my job's not going anywhere anytime soon. And we are as a company growing. And so, there's lots of opportunities, but like most things, you're not the opportunity that you thought you would have may not be what you end up with because the industry is evolving and things are growing fast.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you think that AI-assisted translation is going to help to expand access to language services for underserved populations or regions? And how might that be? I mean, sometimes maybe nonprofit organizations, they may not have the budget for as much translation work as they need. Do you think this can help?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, that's been our biggest use case. We've been to countless AILA conferences, and we've talked to nonprofits that are like, look, we can't afford you. And so we've wanted to, for a long time, create an environment where we can offer them something, right? Maybe you're not having the human aspect of the translation, but, use our tools, use the technology that we've created so that you have an opportunity to do better for your clients, because ultimately, there is this factor of there's a cost associated with it, but we'd like to offer you something so that you have this ability versus having nothing. And I've talked to other nonprofits where their language services are entirely volunteer, and being able to give them a draft translation and say, hey, here's a draft translation. We need this by Sunday close of business. Much better argument than hey, here's a blank document. Can you translate this for us? Pretty please. By the way, we need it Sunday. So the concept of a draft, I think, is very compelling to nonprofits. In language access beyond that is also AI translations will grow it. Not only that, but we saw the demo of GPT-4o with it's an audio demo, right? So you're talking to GPT-4o through an audio interface. I see that being a massive way for you to have an interpreter in your pocket, and that's going to be a big thing. And the other thing too is that LLMs are improving, and we are seeing more LLMs that exist on device. So GPT-4, right? That's something that's entirely in the cloud, basically. And so there's latency, right? There's connectivity issues if you're in the middle of nowhere and you need to talk to someone and neither of you speak the language. There's no signal. This concept of having this on-device LLM or this on-device, AI translation, whatever it may be, is incredibly compelling because you don't need this connection, right? You just need the device. So, that's inherently going to improve access to resources for those that are not able to communicate, in any language. I think that would be a huge improvement. So I'm excited to see what the improvements are on device as well as with audio interpreting.
Yeah, the audio interpreting. I was going to ask about that. It was a little bit off the main topic, but that I think has tremendous impact. And do you know? I mean, just think about that for a second. I mean, if you had if you had the ability for any, any government agency, anything dealing with the public, where you could have immediate, audio interpretation, like conference interpretation, when dealing with, the public and any of our agencies, that would be enormous. I mean, do you know of any major players who are working specifically on audio interpretation?
I don't offhand. As a company, we've kind of solely focused on these sort of document translations, but I will say in the wider language industry, there is definitely a desire to get towards AI for those use cases. AI has affected translations tremendously. AI has had a limited, sorry, AI and machine translations have affected the translation aspect, right? And to kind of just for reference, if there are viewers that are not familiar, the way I describe it is translation is typey, interpreting is talky, right?
Right.
So it's a
That's
very
the
basic,
standard convention.
yeah, very, very basic understanding. But interpreting has been less subject to these sort of advances in technology because it's not been as good as the advances in like machine translation and neural machine translation. So seeing these demos from GPT-4o and then eventually this will matriculate to these open source models. It's incredibly exciting because there is a huge industry of interpreters that are, basically overworked. And so, we'd like to think that there's an opportunity to use technology to improve access to interpreting, that doesn't immediately eliminate all of the interpreters' jobs, but at the same time, there is a serious lack of qualified interpreters in almost any instance. You think about, we see horror stories all the time in the language industry where a police officer has used Google Translate to try and say something to a subject and they've been unlawfully detained. It's wound up in court. There's horror stories of court sort of litigation over how do you interpret certain things that are said in court. What is the initial what the interpreter said does not reflect what the client said in testimony in court, and these things play out often. And so not only is there a need for better AI interpretation, but there's still this need for interpreters that are able to handle some of these more complex and nuanced cases. So that's another situation of like the technology for AI interpreting will improve so that the interpreters can then focus on things that are actually hard and actually require a bit more work, and the folks that are just trying to communicate and find the nearest library or restaurant or something can use another app.
Right. But how would you, I mean, when you debut this Catalyst, getting back to the Catalyst, when you debut this later in the month, let's say our listeners who are subscribers to DocuWise and also use ImmiTranslate, I mean, what would their experience be? What will they see? And, will they have to make any opt-ins or?
Sure. So actually in essence, Catalyst already kind of exists for users of DocuWise that are using the ImmiTranslate integration. So when you select the files that you want to translate, Catalyst is the engine behind producing what we call these AI labels. So when you send us a document, we now immediately produce a quick analysis of the document to say, hey, this is the document, this is what language is in, what, how many pages, whatever, but this is, what category of document it is. These are the subjects of the document. So that's something that you kind of get for free. In terms of the translation, it's not necessarily something you have to opt into. And it's not something that is really going to change the quality or the end translation. It's just that we are going to be using this as sort of a bedrock for any future translation work that we do. The other aspect of Catalyst where you can kind of upload a document yourself and do your own translation and your own edits, your own draft, that's something that is going to be, a little bit more structured so that not everyone is going to have access up front, but we are looking for people that are interested in this opportunity. Nonprofits are a big one, but really anyone that wants to kind of help us test it out and give their feedback, because ultimately, we have translator feedback and that's very valuable, but we also need feedback from our clients as well. But yeah, so when this launches, it's also more of a kind of unveiling of what we do at ImmiTranslate that makes us different, and not necessarily, how does it change things, or what do you need to do extra, right? This is more of a look at what is different about us versus, some of our competitors.
Will the self-translate interface be available at the same time?
Yeah, so it's going to be, we have a sort of a beta list. You'll be able to sign up on the 24th,
Okay.
and then we're going to kind of trickle in users and get feedback as things go on. But we hope to have kind of a generally available Catalyst by the end of October.
And okay, thanks for that. And no, that's great information. Now, do you anticipate any concerns from users, or have you heard concerns in the past? I mean, have you ever received inquiries asking, how much of the translation work that you do is done with machine translation and AI? I mean, do you get those questions, and if so, how do you address them?
Well, so there's always sort of accusations that, hey, you just use Google Translate, and the reality is that we wish we could use Google Translate. Like, it simply doesn't work for the majority of the documents that we have, and that's why Catalyst was invented. So
Sure.
there's there's concerns with anything that we do, especially when it comes to kind of a touchy subject like AI, and that's why we've kind of taken this approach of like, let's be transparent about how we're using AI. Let's talk about what Catalyst is. Let's talk about what goes into it. Let's talk about what it can and cannot do. And then that way, anyone that still has a concern is, obviously welcome to address it with us. And ultimately, there will probably be kind of an opt-out, some level of like, I don't want any AI, and even the AI labels, that may come up. My hope is that people trust us enough to not, we don't have to get to that point, because ultimately we are not doing anything. We've ensured that the documents that you provide to us and you securely send us are not being trained through the methods that I talked about and through our AI privacy policy. But if you still don't trust us, we'd like to still be able to work with you, but you have to understand that there's an additional cost associated with it. And we've also dealt with this with, for the longest time, we've had this option to have not only a translator do the translation, but also a proofreader that kind of comes in afterwards. And that, we have the stats behind it to say that is a more accurate translation, and then it produces, less errors and less issues arise from those translations. But the number one complaint from our customers was that it was too expensive. And so this is kind of a way to say, okay, we're improving the accuracy, and we're not going to raise the price, and it's going to be something that you feel comfortable with. That's a much better deal, I think, than anything else. So we've been doing this long enough to know that there's always issues that arise with certain clients, but we feel that being as transparent as possible with our AI use is the right way to go.
Okay. And looking ahead, what aspect of all of this excites you the most about the potential for AI in the translation industry?
Well, every time new AI models come out, there's kind of a new exciting thing. It's like Christmas every week for me. And so what excites me is I do see a lot of value in the multimodal aspect of some of these LLMs. So we use multimodal LLMs, so visual and text-based prompt, but I like to see how they improve that. We have certain edge cases that we have found in testing where the LLM has like blind spots is the best way to put it. And so I'm hoping that some of these blind spots are alleviated. Obviously there's a desire for more accuracy in some of the translations where, hey, maybe this translation is accurate enough, but like, you could have expanded on it. There's the more so than hallucinations in our industry, the concept of things that are being omitted is the biggest danger that we see. And so we've created sort of secondary prompts that look for issues where, things were omitted. But we'd like to not have to do that in the future, because that adds time, and, that does add cost to the AI translation. So those are like very like technical things. and that's a result of spending most of my time the last like 6 months or whatever, just focused solely on LLMs and translation. But there's a lot to be excited about. Every time there's a new model, it's a whole new toolbox for us, and that's really exciting. And we like to be, 6 months, 1 year ahead of the other translation companies that are chasing this sort of technology, because ultimately we feel that produces a much better service than simply being, a human-based translation tool.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so great talking to you. I mean, we're really, listening to you talk and realizing that, you're someone who's really, right in the thick of this, right on the cutting edge of it. Certainly you're so immersed in all of these details. So, Ian, it's been fantastic hearing about how AI is affecting ImmiTranslate, affecting the translation industry as a whole. And so exciting hearing about Catalyst coming out on September 24th. So really, I hope that you'll join us again in the future as AI continues, the AI revolution continues, and we'll look back, at some point down the road and see what's changed. Yeah, so thanks very much for joining us for episode 42 of Immigration Uncovered. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you, James.